Hey, it's been a while since we've done this. Oh, loving the new dress. This is my favorite dress because I think it makes me look amazing. So, I'm out here smoking, and I wanted to talk about a pattern that is really, really important for all of us just no mill survivors, and that is basically how you set boundaries. So the first step is you sit down and you figure out what you will and won't tolerate, and this is all about you and your control of your access to yourself. This is not about controlling other people. Anytime you have somebody who say, I have a boundary and you're not allowed to do this with this third person anymore, you start to exit the realm of boundaries, and you start entering interpersonal rules. Like a perfectly reasonable one is, okay, if we're gonna get married, you can't sleep with other people. But okay, if we're gonna be married, you can't shake hands with women. Ooh, you get squidgy there. That's not really what boundaries are about. Boundaries are about you and what you will and will not tolerate. So, oh, and the nail polish, it's Zoya. I freaking love it. It's beige with a micro glitter and gold. Normally I hate both of those things, but for some reason I just love this polish. Anyway, boundaries. So, it's perfect. So what you do is you figure out what you will and won't tolerate. So one of my boundaries, cast iron, I won't put up with this from anyone. If it's a boss, I will quit. I will walk out that day. I do not tolerate people screaming at me. No screaming at me, no yelling at me, period, ever. No. My mom, it was a shrieking harridan who would just scream verbal abuse for hours and hours and hours in a row, and I don't have to tolerate it ever again from anyone, so I don't. So that's one of my boundaries. So normal interpersonal adult relationships, I never have to express this boundary because it's sort of accepted as, like, in polite society we don't scream at people. But you have people who have poor social skills, or they think that you're not allowed to have boundaries, like a lot of enmeshed people or a lot of narcissistic parents. So the second step is communicating those boundaries. And when you communicate a boundary, you have to communicate a consequence for violating that boundary. If you scream at me, I will leave. And so, and then you have to enforce that boundary. So if someone starts screaming at me, I'm like, okay, I understand you're upset, I respect that, but you need to take a couple of deep breaths and not yell. I'm going to do my best to listen to you and respond in a caring and adult fashion, but you can't scream at me. And most of the time that works, when especially if, like, you know, a argument with the spice. Just taking a deep breath. Okay, I understand you're upset. I get it. I'm listening. You don't have to scream. Let's get through this. That works. But then you have the crazy pants who decide that you having a boundary is not allowable. It's not acceptable. And that's when you have to enforce the boundary. And this is the hard thing, because when you start enforcing a boundary, especially with a personality disordered person or somebody with really bad behavior patterns, they go through what's called an extinction burst. And if you want to see an extinction burst, watch the show Super Nanny. I tell people to watch this all the time. They're on YouTube. They're like 45 minutes. And so you'll have like a toddler, and she's starting to enforce a bedtime. So the first time she like describes the boundary, it's time to go to bed. The second time she just says, this is the boundary, it's time to go to bed, puts the kid back in bed, and you'll see in like episode after episode after episode, the kid will get out of bed running and screaming, and she just puts him back in bed over and over and over again. So if before the boundary was in place, the kid would get out of bed 9 or 10 times a night, the kid is now, one episode I think it was like 93 times the kid got out of bed. So you just have to keep enforcing the boundary, and after about a week, they stop doing that. Now, extinction bursts, anytime you have a pattern of behavior that has been previously successful, and it doesn't matter if this is with a flatworm that has been trained, if it does a certain thing, it gets food. Anytime that stops working, and like I said, flatworms do this. This is beyond, oh, sorry, it's windy. I don't know if the mic's picking that up. So this is beyond just, oh, awful lighting. That's all right. So this is beyond just what mammals do. Like, this is how animals behave. So if someone used to get their way by screaming, they are going to lose their shit and they're going to scream a lot. Because not only are they pissed they're not getting their way, they're also pissed that their way they're used to getting their way isn't working. So since my personal boundary is people are not allowed to scream at me, I just leave. I'll get up, I'll walk out of the room, I'll go to the bathroom, I'll lock a door, I'll get in my car, I'll go away. People don't scream at me. And I have said flat out to employers, look, I understand that you're upset, this is going on. If you keep screaming at me, I am quitting. Like, I do not tolerate this behavior from anyone at all. My kid doesn't scream at me. My spice don't scream at me. Like, no. And I work customer service, so if I've got a really angry person who's calling on the phone, I'm just like, look, I understand you're upset, I'm on your side, I'm here for you, but we're peers, I'm a professional, I'm trying to help you. You can't scream at me. And if they keep going on, I will hang up. I'll warn them a couple times, but I'm just like, look, no, I'm not putting up with this. And that has never been a problem. In, oh gosh, God, I've been doing IT support in one form or another for a decade. And so, you know, when people will listen to the calls and be like, okay, you hung up on a customer, and they hear I'm perfectly calm and perfectly reasonable, okay, you know, I'm here, I'm going to help you as best I can, but you cannot treat me this way. Never had a problem with it. And I've only had 2 or 3 people that kept screaming after I said, I informed them of this boundary. So 4 steps. 1, figure out what your boundaries are. 2, enforce them or communicate them. 3, figure out what the penalty is for violating that boundary, and 4, enforce it and just be consistent with it. And a lot of people recommend Gavin de Blecker. Anyway, the title of the book is Gift of Fear, and one of the things that he says is if you have a stalker or a personality disordered person who, you know, they're trying to force you to do what they want and you cave, you don't continue enforcing that boundary, what they learn is they have to scream at you for 10 minutes instead of 7. And in 10 minutes you'll crack and you'll do what they want. Or that they have to call you 107 times, because after 106 times they called you when you said, do not call me, you'll crack. And what you do when you don't fully enforce these behaviors is that you actually enforce the exact opposite of what you want, which is for people to treat you reasonably and for people to treat you kindly. And every single person has boundaries, and you're allowed to have boundaries and things that you will and will not tolerate in your own life. So I don't tolerate people treating me abusively. I have had my fill. And the consequence of treating me shittily is I leave. You know, because I don't have to put up with that from anyone in any way, shape, flavor, or direction. I don't have to put up with that from employers. They're always another job. I may not be able to afford to leave that instant with an employer relationship, but I can start putting out resumes. And I have. I've walked out of abusive employer relationships because I grew up with an abusive mother, so I was attracted to abusive relationships, and it took me a long time to figure out that part of that was I was putting up with crap that is illegal from bosses. You know, and one of the things you could say if somebody's like a manipulative crier, and if you decide your boundary is, look, I'm not going to be around people who are weeping and emotionally unstable. It's just not something I'm going to tolerate anymore. Is you can say, okay, obviously you're upset, you're not at your best. I'm going to go, and when you're feeling better, we can revisit this. We'll talk about this later, and then leave. There are other things that you can put as consequences of violating boundaries. Gotta kill this. I tend to be slightly avoidant, despite having thought of myself as sort of an aggressive person who is not avoidant for years. I was wrong. So my preferred way of dealing with it is just to ghost. I'm not always the best at communicating the boundary, but I think mine are pretty reasonable. Most people do. I could be totally wrong, but that's okay. So, like I said, the main thing is that a lot of women have problems with is we've never been taught how to express our boundaries or what we're allowed to have as a boundary. And, you know, just don't put up with it. That's the best thing I can say. You don't have to put up with somebody treating you shabbily. You don't have to put up with someone screaming at you or crying at you or manipulating you. Heading back into work. Oh, the lighting is still awful. So that's basically just it. And it's, you know, it sounds easy when I lay it out that way, and it can be a lot harder in implementation, but really, that's all you got to do. Ooh, man, that lighting's awful. So I hope that's helpful, and you can use those 4 steps, and whenever you start freaking out, just or you're caught up in the middle of it, just remember that you're allowed to say, you know, I am not comfortable with you treating me this way, and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. And then don't. Hasta la pasta.